Okay. Thank you all so much for coming on tonight. We're very glad to have you. My name is Matt Sultan. I'm the Federal Campaigns Manager with League of Conservation Voters. Welcome to Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania's program, Save Money and the Environment. Learn about tax benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act, co-sponsored with Penn Future, New York League of Conservation Voters, New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, and Maryland League of Conservation Voters. Tonight, we'll be hearing from our expert panelists as they break down the consumer benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act so individuals can take advantage of them. Joining us tonight are Matthew Davis with League of Conservation Voters, Ingrid Malmgren with Plug in America, and Elizabeth Marks with the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, or PULP. After presentations, we will have a question and answer period, so please direct your questions to the Q&A box. We will be recording this and it will be made available with resources to all those who registered. For a brief overview to start us off, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law in August 2022, and it is the biggest climate law in the history of the United States. The Inflation Reduction Act works to lower energy costs by investing in the clean energy economy, strengthening domestic manufacturing, powering the electric grid with clean energy, and incentivizing individuals to take advantage of the tax benefits and rebates available to them to transition their homes and appliances to run on electricity. All of these investments will help us curb climate change, as the IRA puts the federal government's goal of 50% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 within reach. And it lays the groundwork for an affordable carbon-free economy now. To start us off, we will be discussing an overview of tax benefits and credits with our first panelist, Matthew Davis. Matthew is the Senior Director of Government Relations at the League of Conservation Voters, where he focuses on federal, environmental, and conservation policy. He is a former EPA scientist with legislative experience both at the agency and in Congress. He'll be highlighting tax benefits available for residents and key places to check for eligibility and resources. Matthew?
Thanks so much, Matt, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Thank you to our sponsor, CVPA, and our co-sponsors, our great state affiliates of the League of Conservation Voters. Very much appreciate everyone getting on the line tonight to hear more about the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm going to share my screen and walk through very quickly a number of slides that provide a sort of top-line overview of the Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to get into some of the specifics around the incentives contained within the Inflation Reduction Act, which I might also refer to as the Clean Energy Plan, just to keep it simple. So we'll spend a bunch more time on the latter part of the slides. So and we certainly can make these slides available for folks if you want to delve into some of the more policy level specifics that I'll skim through in the beginning. So here I go. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So hopefully everyone is seeing that. When Joe Biden thinks about taking action on climate change, he thinks about jobs, jobs, jobs. We have heard him say that so many times, and certainly the Inflation Reduction Act is going to do that. It's also going to provide folks like you who might be interested lots of incentives to take action to reduce your climate pollution, reduce your electricity bill, your energy bills, and help us both take on climate change and the pollution, the air pollution, the water pollution, the land pollution that's associated with fossil fuels. Okay, let's see. Why is it not clicking through? There we go. Okay, so there are a variety of different pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act. It touches so much. Very historic bill, $370 billion roughly, in all these different sectors. We're going to spend the most time around the consumer incentives in transportation, clean energy, and buildings. There are other pieces that are very important. If you're a farmer and you're looking to do climate smart agriculture, there's incentives in here for you. I am not an expert on that, and we won't be able to cover that tonight, but there'll be a lot of other pieces that we will cover. There's so much to cover. It's multiple evenings of webinars. Here is a very quick summary of some of the benefits. I pulled out this chart from a great report from Perry, which was sponsored or commissioned by the Blue Green Alliance, an alliance of environmental groups and labor unions. This gives you a sense of what Pennsylvania might see in terms of investments, both public and private, that's leveraged along with it, and then the jobs that are created per year and then across the entire period. So 21,000 new jobs each year. Not bad. We look at if you were looking at households and how much folks can save on energy costs by taking advantage of the incentives and electrifying appliances and electrifying your transportation, you could see up to $1,800 a year in savings on your energy costs because of the efficiency and because of a lower costs for electrification. I should also mention, I have a public health degree, so I can't not mention this will reduce air pollution that causes asthma attacks and premature deaths, and a whole host of other things. This bill helps get us on the trajectory we need to get to, which is reducing our emissions 50% by 2030, just like Matt just said. You can see the Inflation Reduction Act gets us up to 44% reduction over 2005 levels. We're going to need continued state action and strong and swift and equitable executive action at the federal level as well. And we, of course, are pushing for those things. So, okay, here we go into clean energy. One of the big pieces that I think a lot of folks are excited about, and I certainly am excited about, is the tax incentives on clean energy. You can get 30% of your project costs in a tax incentive, in a tax credit, if you put solar on your roof, or if you have a big field and you have a lot of wind and you happen to be able to put up a wind turbine, which takes a little bit more work, you could get a production tax credit associated with that. These credits will be the entire period of the Inflation Reduction Act, the 10-year budget window. So for projects like offshore wind, pictured here, and others, these long-term incentives are creating a really big market level push to deploy more clean energy. For the homeowner, or folks like you and me who are looking to put solar panel on your roofs, 30% tax credit is pretty strong. There is also additional incentive for folks in low income communities. Some of the details of that program are still being worked out, but for some projects, you could get an additional 10% tax credit. And then there's a separate program that's for low income housing as well, which is an additional 10% credit. That is also the details of that is also being worked out. You see on this slide also the Green Bank, or the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Some of that money is going to go through states, and states will run programs that likely will incentivize community solar in particular, but other programs as well. And then some of that money will go into climate banks, where it will be accessible for bigger projects, bigger investments, not probably, unless distributed through local lenders, probably less likely to be making solar panels go on an individual homeowner's roof, but that is all still also taking shape. So we'll see about that. We will come back to the tax incentives here in a little bit. Transportation. So this is another place we're going to spend a bit of time, primarily for the electric vehicle tax credits. New vehicles can get up to $7,500 in a tax credit. Used vehicles up to $4,000. There are income limits on both of these programs, different income limits on both of these programs. There is also a 30% credit for commercial heavy duty vehicles, which is also very important for, for fleets looking to, delivery trucks looking to go electric. These are major contributors to pollution in our neighborhoods, and also, spewing climate pollution. So very important to have those incentives as well. I won't be going into the details quite as much around that, assuming that most of you don't own fleets, but happy to take questions on that if folks do. We also see a lot of incentives here for manufacturing the things in the US, both batteries and vehicles, and also the clean electricity, the solar panels, the wind turbines, that kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to move us along. I'm going to spend a little less time here on the health and communities pieces, but know that there's a lot of investment to improve the environments in environmental justice communities and communities that have been either overlooked or purposely neglected in some cases, unfortunately. 40% of the benefits will be flowing to communities like that under the Justice 40 initiative from the Biden-Harris administration. So far, pretty strong results and good trajectory, but we will have to make sure that this continues so that is equitably implemented. Clean manufacturing, I mentioned this just before. Again, I won't go into the details here, a little bit less consumer focused, but that New Jersey offshore wind turbine manufacturing facility and port right next to the nuclear power plant that's existing, that's the kind of thing that one of the kinds of things that this will incentivize. I will spend a teeny bit of time here with buildings because efficiency in buildings is a big way to save both on energy costs and also on emissions. So there is a good deal of money here for large scale projects. And there's also incentives for and tax incentives and rebates for individual scale projects. Okay, agriculture, I'd mentioned this up top. We're not going to go into the details here, but just know there's a lot of investments here. And it's very, very strong and good. Okay, so why take action to be energy efficient, to transition to electric appliances, electric vehicles? Well, this goes through a number of them, reduces emissions, saves you money, makes your house more comfortable, gets you new appliances, and improves your clean air. Improves your indoor air. So those are all very good reasons. And you see some of the products that you can get incentives on right here on this slide. So I find very helpful the Rewiring America Inflation Reduction Act calculator. How much money will you save? So I certainly, when this launched, I was so excited about it. I immediately went over and took a look because I myself want to do some things in my house. And I was thinking, I know this bill inside and out, having worked on policies contained therein and also working to pass it. But, what does this mean for me? So you fill out your information. No, this is not my information, just in case you're wondering. I don't live in 10801 zip code. So you fill out the information here, you ask them to calculate it, and then it gives you a summary. It's a fantastic way to get a quick picture of like, okay, what's out there for me from this bill. Other panelists will get into more of the details around the upfront discounts and rebates, which are really targeted at low to middle income households. They show up here, and I will talk a little bit more about the tax incentives, mostly are tax credits. Just so folks understand, tax credits are basically you get the benefit of them when you file your taxes. If you don't owe anything in tax, you don't get the credit unless it's considered refundable. And some of these are refundable, and some of them depend upon the entity that is submitting the tax credit, whether it's refundable or not. So there are some, for example, if you're a municipality and you're putting solar panels on your municipal building or your schools, municipalities are eligible for that tax credit being refundable, because the municipality is generally not responsible for or filing taxes, federal taxes. So, I mean, they have to do payroll taxes and a variety of other things, don't get me wrong, but they don't have something to offset the credits with. So this, one of the things that we push for in this bill is making them refundable. So your town can now get money back, even though they don't have a tax, even if they didn't have tax liability, for doing, for example, solar panels on the school, 30% of the project back. Rebates are usually ideally done at point of sale. So when you purchase something, you get the money back. People are familiar with rebates from, having done this, buy this printer, get $20 off. And so there's a couple examples here. The electric car, the tax credit example, up to a $7,500 tax credit, depends on some of the eligibility, which we'll get into later, but you only get that $7,500 when you file your taxes. In future years, so probably starting next year, that can be offered as an upfront tax credit through the dealership that's selling you the vehicle. If you were to insulate your home this year, you could take up to 30% of the project costs as a tax credit, up to $1,200 per year. So a lot of good tax credits there. And then for rebates, there's this example, the state example from the state of New York, of getting $2,000 rebate when you buy the electric vehicle. And one of the programs coming from the Inflation Reduction Act is a rebate program for buying. If you were to buy a heat pump, you could get up to $8,000 of that project, of that cost, depending on income. And that is going to be mostly rolling out through your state energy program or state energy office. So eligibility, number of these, a lot of the incentives in the bill are based on, have different eligibility levels. So it can be a little complicated, and that's why that that calculator that I showed you from Rewiring America has you put in your income. They're not, they're not trying to pry, they're not trying to market you stuff. They're just trying to help you understand, where you fit. And that's also why they need your zip code. So the eligibility for a lot of the rebates are based on the median income. So for example, in this hypothetical, if your zip code had a median income of $112,600, then if you were under 90, you could get up to 100% of your projects covered, project costs covered. And if you made between 90 and 168, you could get 50% of project costs covered. And then there is different eligibility requirements for the tax incentives as well. Right now, the credit for example, doing solar on your roof does not have a limitation that I'm remembering. But if you were to buy an electric vehicle, there is. So 150,000 for single filers, 225,000 for the head of a household, and 300,000 income, adjusted gross income for joint filers. So, and then there's also eligibility on the cars themselves or the vehicles themselves that you're purchasing. Only certain ones, it has to be under a certain price point, and you have to have the vehicle has to be assembled in North America for getting $3,700 of the credit. And then also the battery materials and components have to meet certain requirements, and that get if they do meet if the vehicle does meet the requirement, and they have to be a certain size. So the little itty bitty batteries, like, you're not going to get that that tax credit. But if it's big enough and it's made in the correct places in the world that are incentivized in this in this law and in the regulations that the IRS is putting out, you get an additional $3,700. There will be more on this, and I'm not going to go into details because my panelists will be able to do so. So going back to the rewiring page, this gives you a listing of what you might be eligible for and more information about them. This some of the programs are still rolling out. So I'm trying to think if it's the next slide. Yeah, mention like things like the rebate for the heat pump that I mentioned earlier, that $8,000. That is going to be rolling out through state energy offices and likely is not going to be available until later this year. So you wouldn't be able to go get a rebate today or tomorrow if you went out to this, went out to a contractor or the heat pump store down the end of the street and said, hey, I'd like to buy a heat pump. They can't say, oh, and I'll give you the $8,000 rebate. You can, however, access that tax credit, that 30% tax credit for heat pumps that gives you up to $2,000 per heat pump per year. So if you were to buy two, you can't get $4,000. You'd only get $2,000. Okay, I am gonna go to the next one. Actually, I'm gonna go back. So this is a fantastic calculator. Very much encourage folks to look at it. And there are other great resources out there as well. I will plug a former organization I used to work with many moons ago. Environment America and US PIRG both have good resources for consumers and some how-to videos if you want to do some of this work yourself, which is kind of neat and appeals to me. There's also a deeper dive on more policy level stuff that the federal government has put out. It's a guidebook on the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, especially good for if there's anyone here from municipal government or select people or other folks at the municipal or state level who are interested in that, accessing those kinds of incentives. That is a very helpful, I think, guidebook and an associated website. So I am going to wrap there, and I am looking forward to the Q&A session. And thank you all again for being here. I will stop sharing and go back on mute.
Thank you, Matthew, so much for all of that good information, going over it so well. One of the main questions we tend to get about the Inflation Reduction Act benefits has to do with the electric vehicle tax credits. It's the primary thing people think about when they think about these benefits. And to talk about that more, we have a great panelist. We have Ingrid Malmgren from Plug in America. Ingrid has over a decade of experience of advancing sustainable energy and transportation electrification through research, utility regulatory proceedings, and legislative advocacy. She started driving electric in 2016. And as the policy director of Plug in America, she focuses on federal policy from an EV driver and consumer advocacy perspective. And I spent a lot of time researching and talking about the clean vehicle tax credits. Ingrid, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the introduction. Matthew gave a high-level overview of the EV tax credits, and now I'm going to share my screen and do a deep dive. Okay, hope everybody can see that. So thanks so much for joining me today to talk about the clean vehicle tax credits. I've got a lot to cover today, so let's jump right in. So my goal today is to help you understand more about the federal EV tax credits so that you can get the most out of them. And hopefully I can answer some of your questions. Quickly, I'm from Plug-in America, and we're a nonprofit dedicated to accelerating the use of plug-in electric vehicles. And please feel free to check out our website for resources on the tax credits and to learn more about us. Quick disclaimer, I am neither a lawyer nor am I an accountant. So if you want to be absolutely sure that you or the vehicle you want qualifies for these tax credits, you should ask a lawyer or a tax accountant, a tax lawyer or an accountant. So let's start with the 3 types of clean vehicle tax credits that are part of the Inflation Reduction Act. There are tax credits for new clean vehicles, previously owned or used clean vehicles, and commercial or business clean vehicles. 30D, which is the name of the tax code for the new clean vehicle tax credits, has been around for a while. And the Inflation Reduction Act extended the tax credit with some notable changes. The used and commercial EV tax credits are both new and went into effect January 1st. So let's start with the new clean vehicle tax credit. In order to be eligible for the new clean vehicle tax credit, the vehicle and the purchaser have to meet the criteria in the left-hand column on this slide. These 3 criteria include MSRP caps and final assembly criteria that the vehicle must meet. And then there's income limits that the taxpayer must meet. And this is your modified adjusted gross income. In the Inflation Reduction Act, the new clean vehicle tax credit amount is split into 2 parts based on battery sourcing requirements, including critical minerals and battery components. But based on the interim guidance released on December 29th, which started January 1st, the battery sourcing requirements will not be in effect until the IRS issues additional proposed guidance, which they expect to do in March. We don't know when in March this will be released, but when it is, it will be effective immediately. So this is not in effect. So until the IRS issues additional guidance in March, the tax credit amount will be based on battery size. So all electric vehicles, all of the ones on the market today, have a big enough battery to qualify for the full tax credit amount of $7,500. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which have both a gasoline engine and a battery and are able to be plugged in, are all eligible for the minimum tax credit of $3,751, and many of them are eligible for more. So the new clean vehicle, the first criteria for the 30D tax credit is the MSRP cap. SUVs, pickup trucks, and vans are subject to an MSRP cap of $80,000, and all other vehicles are subject to a cap of $55,000. I recommend looking them up on the IRS website, which includes lists of qualified manufacturers and vehicles, as well as the applicable MSRP cap. The information on this website is subject to change, so definitely look up your desired vehicle before you purchase. We have a link to this on our website, and I believe that they will also send an email around after this with the link. So where do you find the MSRP value? For the purposes of this tax credit, the MSRP is the base retail price of the vehicle, plus the price of any optional equipment physically attached to the vehicle at the time of delivery to the dealer. It doesn't include destination charges or optional items added by the dealer, or taxes or fees. The Windows sticker here shows the MSRP in the big blue box, but this is not the MSRP used to determine EV eligibility because it includes destination and delivery fees. The number that would be used is the number without the destination charges, which was just circled. Another criteria the vehicle must meet is that it must undergo final assembly in North America. That's 50 states plus the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and Canada. EV buyers must also meet income limits to qualify for this tax credit. To be eligible, your modified adjusted gross income in the year you purchase the EV or the preceding year must be lower than these limits. Another thing to note with the new clean vehicle tax credit is that the 200,000 vehicle manufacturer cap has been eliminated. This means that Tesla, GM, and Toyota vehicles are once again eligible for the tax credit, assuming that they meet the other requirements. So now let's look at the used EV tax credit. The used EV tax credit is a new tax credit which just became active on January 1st. To meet the requirements, the vehicle must be 2 years old, under $25,000. It has to be sold by a dealer, but there are no additional sourcing requirements, no critical minerals, battery components, or final assembly. There are income caps shown here, and the credit amount is $4,000 or 30% of the price of the vehicle, whichever one is less. This guidance will remain in effect for the duration of the tax credits through the end of 2032. There's a few other criteria, but I think we're getting short for time, so you can definitely read through, and these slides will be distributed after as well. So businesses or commercial vehicle tax credits, let's cover those. The business tax credit is also new and became effective January 1st as well. It has significantly fewer requirements than the other tax credits. It must be used for business purposes. The credit caps are $7,500 for vehicles less than 14,000 pounds and 40,000 for vehicles over 14,000 pounds. So those are like big, heavy trucks and stuff. The credit amount is either 30% of the sales price for all electric, 15% of the sales price for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, or the incremental cost of the vehicle. That means the cost difference between the new clean vehicle or the EV and a comparable gas-powered vehicle. So there are the caps, so you're more likely to hit the credit caps and have a $7,500 tax credit or $40,000 than have to use the credit amount caps. This guidance will also remain in effect for the duration of these tax credits through the end of 2032. So, unlike the new consumer clean vehicle tax credit, the commercial clean vehicle tax credit has no battery or mineral sourcing requirements, no final assembly requirements, and no MSRP caps, and no income limits on the taxpayers. EV leases will go through this tax credit. So from a consumer perspective, this may offer opportunities to access tax credits you might not have been eligible for under 30D. If you don't meet the income limits, the vehicle's too expensive, the vehicle isn't assembled in North America, you can lease the vehicle and the commercial tax credit can be used as money down or to buy down your monthly lease payment. You'll have to be sure to ask the dealer about this, but many manufacturers are planning to pass this credit along, and you can see them on some of the manufacturer websites. So here's a final summary of the 3 types of EV tax credits and which criteria apply to each one. I also want to point out that the new and used EV tax credit will be transferable, similar to what Matthew said, to the dealers starting in January of 2024. This means that the dealer can access the tax credit and provide the money upfront to the purchaser as money down on the vehicle. So here's what's next. These requirements for the new clean vehicle tax credit, that's 30D, are going to change in March, which is, well, quite soon. So we don't know when exactly in March. It could be March 1st, it could be March 31st, but the IRS is going to issue proposed guidance on the battery sourcing requirement, and then that will change. But we do know that the used EV tax credit and the commercial EV tax credit, the one people will use for leasing, are not planning on changing. So we don't know which vehicles will be eligible for the new clean vehicle tax credit once the battery sourcing requirements are released. So a few key takeaways: if you're interested in purchasing a new EV, sooner might be better. If you can take advantage of this before the new guidance is released in March, you may not have to deal with any of the battery requirements. Leasing, great workaround to a lot of the requirements. If you aren't set on purchasing, but you're interested in trying to get into an EV, leasing could be a fantastic way to do that. The used clean vehicle tax credit doesn't have a ton of requirements. So if you meet the income limits and the cost cap, this may be a great way to get into an electric vehicle. And finally, check the IRS website to find out which vehicles are eligible and the MSRP limits of that vehicle. Be sure to compare with the exact model and trim level of the vehicle you plan to purchase to make sure that the vehicle you purchase qualifies. And here's some resources which will also be sent around after. So I will close now and send it on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. Up next, we will be hearing a little bit more about the equity focus on the Inflation Reduction Act and how it can benefit low-income residents with Elizabeth Marks. Liz is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, or PULP, a statewide specialty legal services program where she works to combat utility insecurity through targeted utility litigation, policy advocacy, representation, and education. Take it away.
Let me get my video going. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to the League of Conservation Voters and all the partners for inviting me to come here today, talk to you about something that I work every day to solve, and that's utility poverty and insecurity. And so how does the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, help this? And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But a little bit about us. We're a statewide legal services program here in Pennsylvania. We represent individuals and groups, and we are advocating every day to make sure that people can maintain safe, affordable, and clean energy to their home. Just wanted to start and put just kind of some context around energy burdens. When we're talking about low-income utility poverty or energy poverty, we're really talking about low-income households who often pay as much as 30% of their income on home energy costs. And this is compared, I'll compare that to 2 to 4% for higher income households. I'll challenge you all, take your yearly income, total household income, what your energy costs are for home energy, and figure out your own energy burden. It's a really interesting exercise to see where you fall in that. I also want to start out by noting that people of color, particularly Black and Hispanic households, have significantly higher energy burdens than that of white households. It's an important context as we're talking about the clean energy transition to make sure that we are not leaving behind an entire portion of our population, and that our energy policy, while grappling with cleaning the grid, is also grappling with historic racism that has resulted in redlining policies, things like that, that have resulted in disparities in energy burden based on race and based on class. So just a moment about utility insecurity in Pennsylvania, so that we know what our neighbors are experiencing. Last year in Pennsylvania, we had about just shy of 300,000 households experience an involuntary payment-related termination of their gas and electric. We also, as of February 1st, had an estimated 10,000 households that were at that moment, as of that survey, without heat, right? Pretty cold weeks in early February. and access to utilities and particularly energy services in the home is just so critical to make sure health and safety is there. And it's a huge part of environmental justice. Consequences of utility security, of course, negative health outcomes, exposure to unsafe temperatures, but we also see families experience disunity where children use services may take kids from the home when there's no heat in the home because it's not safe for them. It hinders child learning and development. You can't really do your homework when the lights are off. You also can't connect to the internet, which is so critical and was critical throughout the pandemic. We also see a lot of long-term impacts to housing stability. A utility termination can often be a catalyst for eviction. It can cause a foreclosure, condemnation on a property. Every presentation I give, I try to point out this as we went through the pandemic and learned just how important it was to have a safe and healthy home and access to stable energy services. Utility moratorium and researchers are finding that, just having a pause on energy terminations around the nation reduced COVID infection rates by over 4% and reduced mortality rates by over 7%. So that's huge, right? I'll tell what are the factors driving these disparities? And I'm moving quickly because there's a lot to go through. So gonna keep us moving along, and I want to get to the good solutions, right? Couple of the reasons, the top reason for the disparities in energy burden is really inefficient housing. If you live in older, less efficient homes with less insulation, your appliances are older, you have leaky pipes and other structural issues that are driving up your usage. So just the fact of living in a home that has less insulation, less measures to keep the home kind of at a constant temperature, you burn less energy when you have an airtight home that has, upgraded efficient appliances and all of the bells and whistles that the IRA is bringing to our families. Economic impact, of course, with the pandemic and inflation has hit low-income households more severely. It is more expensive, I'm sure, as all of us know, when we go to the grocery store, we spend a lot more money now than we used to even before the pandemic. And so who's that hurting the most? Low-income families, right? They went from having very little discretionary funds, if any, to having even less discretionary funds with which to invest in energy efficiency upgrades. Couple other things relevant to this discussion, right? The costs of updating our grid, our energy grid, to make sure that it's hardened and that when severe weather hits, we don't all lose power. That costs money. And who pays for those costs? We all do through our utility bill. And so the need to invest more into grid infrastructure is actually partly driving energy costs up for lower income households. Also, the clean energy transition, as we bring clean energy on board, we need the federal government to step in and others to step in so that the cost isn't borne all through the utility bill, where it's spread across all ratepayers rather than kind of who can afford it. So the energy transition is in many ways contributing to kind of doubling down on some of the disproportionate impacts experienced in low-income communities and communities of color across our nation and also in our region. So those are some of the major drivers and factors. And I'll just say, because I'm going to dive into these programs, energy efficiency is a really key solution to helping drive down low-income energy burdens and energy costs. Whole home weatherization and efficiency can save a low-income household an estimated 30% in energy costs a year, can be as much as $283. And really that varies depending on how much energy costs are. So those cost savings would be even higher right now because energy costs are so high. I also wanted to mention that in my presentation, I'm going to focus on the energy efficiency programs through the IRA. But as Matthew mentioned in the beginning, there is a whole host of other types of programs that are going to help combat energy poverty and disparities in energy burdens. There's things like pollution reduction focused in environmental justice communities and low-income communities, communities of color. There are improved access to renewable energy. There's also lots of programs to help improve the public housing stock for very low income households. I could do a full training on all of these different funding streams, but for today, in the what remains of my 6 minutes, I hope I have a couple left. I'm going to just focus on the EE programs, the energy efficiency programs. And so there's 2 primary existing programs that I think are important to contextualize what the IRA will do in terms of broadening the scope of what's available in Pennsylvania. And I know some of you are sitting in neighboring states and there's similar programs in those states. But essentially, we rely for low-income energy efficiency on the Weatherization Assistance Program. And I'll note that there was a lot of additional funds, about $182 million for Pennsylvania through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And that was the act that was passed shortly before the Inflation Reduction Act. It didn't include a lot of energy provisions, but it did have one, and it massively, jumped up the scale of weatherization assistance programming in Pennsylvania, which provides whole home energy efficiency and conservation measures and weatherization for households. I will note that these 2 programs are available to both renters and homeowners. They have to be low income, and they have to be pretty low income to qualify for the Weatherization Assistance Program, or for, in Pennsylvania, we have low income usage reduction programs run by the utilities, which are very similar to the Weatherization Assistance Programs. They also provide whole home energy efficiency and usage reduction services, and are available also to households with at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. To give you just a little perspective on what that means for your income, at the income level for these two programs, a 2-person household has a $39,444 a year in terms of income. For a 4-person household, it would be $60,000 or less. So we're talking about fairly low income households qualifying for these 2 programs. There's some other details in there, and the slides are going to be sent out. Right now, we're serving somewhere around 2,200 homes through these 2 programs. Now the IRA, right? It through 2 particular programs that I'm going to talk about, HOMES and HERA, which together are referred to as the Home Energy Rebate Programs. The first one is, and they're funded at about $8.8 billion across the country. For Pennsylvania, that translates to, for the Home Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program, or High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program, otherwise known as HERA. In Pennsylvania, we're standing to receive about $129.2 million that can be spent over 10 years. This is the program that is really focused on transitioning low and moderate income households from fossil fuels and gas. So to take homes, and we have a lot of homes in Pennsylvania that heat with fuel oil or wood or coal. I still serve clients every day that have coal in their homes, transitioning them to high efficiency electric. And that's what HERA is really focused on doing. It provides there are 2 tiers to HERA in terms of the level of benefits. Low-income households have to have under 80% area median income. And to give you an idea, this is very county specific, right? So you'd need to look up your state, your county, and figure out what your area median income is. For Dauphin County, which is where Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is, middle of the state, we're, just an average county here, a two-person household at 80% AMI would have an income of about $60,000 and $60,400. A four-person household would have a household income of about $75,450. So that's going to vary, but if you notice, that is a lot higher income threshold than the existing programs I just talked about. So right there, the IRA is going to substantially expand the level of 100% rebate free energy efficiency programming to low-income households. So if you are under that 80% AMI, you would qualify essentially for up to $14,000 or 100% of the costs of the efficiency, the electrification upgrade. For moderate income households between 80 to 150% AMI, they're going to get 50% of the costs covered and up to $14,000. So if they have an electrification project, say they're going to put a mini splits on their house and a heat pump, right? An electric heat pump. If you're a low income customer, you could get up to 100% of those costs covered for up to a cap of $14,000 for the project. If you're a moderate income household, you'll get half of those costs covered for up to $14,000. There's some individual caps in there if you're doing some other things in addition to the electric heat pump. You might be putting in a heat pump water heater. Again, you could get 100% of the cost covered if you're low income, up to $14,000, or 50% if you are moderate income. There are some contractor benefits in here, and that's a workforce issue. So there's, right now we have a workforce that is designed to deliver the existing programs. And so we really are going to be building out a clean energy workforce with these funds to be able to deliver these programming to end consumers. So that's the HERA program. And I'll note, it's estimated, and Rewire America is estimating that HERA will save between $377 and almost $500 per year, depending on your existing heating system and, of course, your geographic location, how much you use your heat. The last program I'm going to talk briefly about, and I know we are probably very short on time, so I'm going to wrap up, but the HOMES program, and many of you are probably interested in this one in particular. It's funded in Pennsylvania, or will be funded at about $129.9 million. It provides these tiered discounts depending on how much the project itself is going to save in energy. So if your project is going to save about 20% energy costs, and you're a single family household, you could get either a $2,000 rebate or 50% of the project covered, and that's whatever is less. If you're going to, with that project, save 40% of energy or more, you could get a rebate of $4,000 or 50% of the project costs. And if you are low income, LMI, low or moderate income, you're going to get 2 times those benefit levels. So, a $2,000 rebate would go to $4,000. A $4,000 rebate would go to $8,000. There are also benefits for multifamily buildings. So multifamily building owners will be able to get as much as $2,000 or $200,000 rebate for building upgrades that would reduce energy by 20% and up to $400,000 building rebate for projects that would save 35% or more. Importantly, one of the biggest challenges ahead for making sure that these benefits go to actually serve low and moderate income households is eliminating the out-of-pocket costs. And that's going to require us to be really creative in each of our states, working together to design programs that can eliminate those costs by providing wraparound services. Because as much as these programs are going to buy down the cost, they aren't going to be zero. And as we talked about, households, particularly low-income households, are already cash strapped and do not have the upfront capital to put out costs if their job is not 100% covered. So I mentioned those caps, right? Sometimes a job, once you get into the home, it can cost more than what the estimate may be. And if that cap doesn't cover the full costs, a low-income household could be facing a pretty steep bill. So we are working really hard with our state energy office, who is going to be designing these programs to make sure that they're well coordinated with the existing programs to provide the wraparound services necessary so that low and moderate income households can actually make good use of these. We also have to do a lot of workforce development and education. And I've noted a lot in the chat or in the question and answer, are these available yet, or when are they going to be available? And I will say we don't know. And that's, I'm hopeful that soon we will see these roll. But I honestly think it could be, the latter part of 2023 before we see these rebates and discounts available. So with that, I know I'm over time, and my apologies. I'll pass it on to the next piece.
Thank you so much, Liz, for that excellent presentation and that great overview of all the benefits. Thank you to all of our presenters on that. We're going to go a little bit over, about 5 minutes, but we want to get to some of your questions here that you've been putting in the Q&A. A lot of these questions have been answered, so if folks want to go back and check out the Q&A, our presenters have been answering questions for some time, but we just want to lift up a few of them just now, and we'll be sending out resources and the answers and whatnot after the program. First, Jeffrey had a question. What are the differences between the Inflation Reduction Act, Build Back Better Act, and Infrastructure Act /bills? Yeah, there were a lot of terminology thrown around over the last few years about big federal investments. Essentially, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That dealt with more of building infrastructure, rebuilding things, and had a little bit to do here, and provided funding, like Liz said, with weatherization assistance program. But the Inflation Reduction Act, which was part of Build Back Better and then scoped down and passed last year, contains more clean energy programs that we were discussing today. And these two are separate, but they often work together. We also just want to note that for a lot of you, you had very specific questions about your individual instances, and that's great. And we appreciate you being here tonight and listening to the presentation, but we just wanted to reiterate that we're not tax professionals, we're not attorneys, but we will be sharing around the recording and all the great resources that our presenters have so that you can go out and explore these resources and kind of find out for yourself and kind of put you on the track to find things. And we'll be sharing around all of those and the recording for all the wonderful resources. We got a questions about municipalities and nonprofits who can take part in these benefits, because a lot of the focus was tonight on residential benefits. But we appreciate that many of you, serve your communities and are looking out for, your small town, your state, and how you can get some of these. Matthew, if you could come online, do you have a good place for municipalities and organizations to find some benefits? I know that the climate program portal is a good source for that. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I think that those are good. There is, I do think that the Inflation Reduction Act guidebook that the Biden administration put out is, though very comprehensive and therefore sort of big, would be a good place to go for reference for municipalities. Blue Green Alliance also put out a document that I think has some helpful information in it as well. We're a
Okay.
member of that organization, and so between the two of those things, I think you'd start off on the right foot, at least with some of the basic information.
Perfect. Right, and we'll be sending around those details after the webinar with the recording. We got questions from Henry and Mika and others shared concern about the equity program. Liz, this is a little bit of a long one by Henry put out, gave to us a question beforehand. By Henry's research, when it comes to lowering the greenhouse gas emissions for residents, the funding available for the low and middle income households might only cover between 0.5% and 2% of the low and middle income households electrification. He wants to know if panelists agree with this assessment. Does there need to be more of a focus and additional funding put toward these types of programs?
Yes. Yes, there needs to be more funding. Yes, there needs to be expanded funding. We need to coordinate our programs so that they're delivered holistically and, addressing those most in need. I don't know if those calculations are accurate, but I would venture to guess they're somewhere in the neighborhood. We know that existing programs are only serving a small tip of the iceberg. These programs through the IRA are going to substantially increase that. What I will say is, we need the workforce programs in order to be able to administer these programs. So ramping up more money, yes. We also need to be paying attention to make sure that we have the workforce to deliver these benefits. And so, that's really where I'd land. But I think it's spot on. Costs money to solve poverty. So.
Absolutely. As we head into the last question, because we are going over, this is for all the panelists. And Ingrid, if we can start with you. What can attendees here do to continue to achieve more tangible results and wins like these to help consumers and businesses afford environmental upgrades?
I'm sorry, Matt, can you repeat that question again? It was
Sure thing. Yeah,
it's a big one.
All good. Yeah, what can attendees here do to achieve more tangible wins like these to help consumers and businesses afford environmental upgrades?
Oh, well, get involved. Get involved, write your legislators, write your Congress people.
Okay, Liz?
I hate to say ditto, but yeah, I mean, just being here tonight and getting an understanding of what's in it. The other thing is we have to be patient and persistent. So I'll just add that patience and persistence. We're all really anxious for these programs to be up and running, but it does take tremendous effort in coordination with the state agencies, with the advocacy groups. And so getting involved, figuring out who's working on this, and how you can help carry the message forward is really important. Showing up when there's comments, comment periods, public hearings, all the rest of it, showing up, being there, and then also recognizing we're all human and trying to launch these programs. A little grace and patience with one another is pretty important here too.
Perfect. And Matthew?
Yeah, I think I would agree with all of those things. I do think so. For those of you who are on the call tonight or on the webinar tonight, you're clearly very motivated and interested in learning more about these and doing stuff in your own personal life. But also, I think, telling your neighbors about it and telling your family about it and your friends and helping be the folks on the ground who understand this a little bit better and can say like, oh, your boiler's giving you trouble. Have you thought about a heat pump? Like, go to Rewiring America and enter your information. It'll tell you what kind of incentive might be there for you. And I think that it's going to take that kind of person to person, face to face oftentimes, but text works too sometimes for especially for folks in my age group and younger. I think it's going to take that kind of interaction to really flip the switch for some people, pun not intended. And I also think I will point out something that I don't say enough. We have an estimate of this bill, these incentives being worth about $370 billion, but so much of the program is tax incentives, and those tax incentives are not capped, that this bill actually could be more like a $700 billion investment or more in making our country a clean energy economy, in making people's homes more comfortable and saving them money by them being more efficient in what heat they're using, and how much heat is not being lost through their windows or their walls or their roofs. And so I get very excited about the opportunity with adoption, with getting more people, being the promoters out in the community to say, yeah, you're perfect for a heat pump. Like your house, it'd be great if you put insulation in too. Look what you can do with your home and how much more comfortable it'll be. Anyway, so that's the kind of thing that I think a group like this on the phone, the 700 of you on the phone tonight, on the video tonight, like be those promoters in your community and in your friend groups and your family groups. We need you, and there isn't a limit to these tax incentives, so everyone should take advantage of them.
Thank you. Okay, we're just a couple minutes over here. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out. I hope you learned a lot. I learned a lot. And we'll again be sending out a follow-up email with a recording of the program of tonight's event, with the various resources that were mentioned throughout the presentation. And we'll email around the answers of the panelists that they were able to provide during the presentation in the Q&A, just because we had a lot to unpack here and still more to unpack because we're always learning. As you heard, there will be new information and guidance always coming out regarding some of these benefits in the near future. So stay tuned for updates. Thank you so much. Take care. Good night.